First Congregational Church. It's great to have you here this morning with us. This is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, our very first opportunity to have a video service. So I hope that you're tuning in, that you're listening, and you can hear well. We're pretty amateurish at this, so this may not come off completely as professional, but hopefully we will be able to worship God together today in a respectful way, in a good way. We do have a number of announcements. One, first of all, is that everything is canceled here at the church for the next couple of weeks. And we're hoping to have service again on Palm Sunday, April 5th, but that will be up in the air until we find out the status of the coronavirus that's going around, and we want to keep you healthy. So if necessary, we'll postpone Easter and have that a little bit later. We do have a rummage sale coming up on April 30th. That is still a go, so we hope that you will plan to be here for that, April 30th and March 1st and 2nd. And also, if you want to bring things in, people are already starting to bring those kinds of things in to be stored in the room downstairs. And then one very important announcement has to do with the offering. Even though you're not here this Sunday morning, we still have expenses that continue to go on. Bills that need to be paid, and so we would really, really appreciate it if you would send your check in or have paid through your bank account, or even call the church office and have it put on your credit card. It'd be very much appreciated because the church bills continue even though we aren't open for business at this point. Let us pause for a time of silent prayer, or for a time of prayer and the Lord's Prayer. Most gracious God, on this day when we are not here physically, we ask your blessing on all of us, on our homes and our families. We ask that you will help us to all be healthy in these days. We know, Lord, that a lot of churches like us are closed this Sunday morning, but we know that the Spirit is not closed off, that you are here among us, that you hear our prayers, that you hear our concerns, you hear our fears. This morning, O Lord, you are the great God of the universe, and we acknowledge that. We know that you are in control of everything that happens, and so we trust you. We ask that you will surround us with your grace and your presence this day, that you will teach us your way, and that you will be ever mindful of our needs. We do pray this morning, Lord, that you will be with people who have this virus already. We pray that you will help them to regain their health and not to pass on. We know that a number of people will. We ask that you be with their families. We pray that you will protect us, that you'll protect our loved ones, that you'll protect our city and our state, and even in a larger venue, our nation and our world, that this would come to an end fairly quickly. Lord, we do pray this morning that you'll be with our church, that you will help us to follow in your footsteps as you would lead. We ask that you will surround the leadership with decision-making that they are charged with and help them to be wise. We pray, Lord, that you will be with our country, for our president, for our Congress people, for those people who are in charge of all kinds of things, including this current crisis. We pray that you will give them wisdom and the ability to do what they need to do in this situation. We pray for our governor, for our mayor, for our city council people. We pray for our firefighters, our police force. We pray for our EMS workers, all of those people who work on our behalf in the official capacity. We pray that your blessing will be upon them and that you would be with them each day that they work. Oh Lord, would you hear us now as we join our voices together at home or here in this congregation with the words that Jesus taught us to pray. Please pray with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our scripture lesson this morning is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 12 through 22. We read the words of Paul. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there's no resurrection of the dead, then Christ has not been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our proclamation has been in vain, and your faith has been in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God, because we testified of God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised. If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then those who have died in Christ have perished. If for this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all be made alive. The Lord bless to us these readings of his word. Well, today we come to the last episode, or last session of our series on Christoph Yerushalayim. As you recall, last week he was beaten on the shores of Lake Huron and had died. Listen, gentlemen, I know you were friends of the deceased, and I know he was quite well liked around town, but my hands are tied. They really are. If no family or friends are available or willing to take up the expense of a funeral, I'll embalm the body according to law and have him laid in a potter's grave out at St. Andrew's Cemetery. That's all I can do. Without payment up front, I cannot even allow a wake to take place here at the funeral parlor. Now, if you can come up with, say, $6,500, that's $800 for the cemetery plot, $550 to have it opened and closed, $2,800 for the casket, $1,900 for body preparation services expenses, and $235 for document fees, we can give him a nice farewell. But Mr. Black, we don't have that kind of money. Are you sure you can't find any of Chris' relatives? Asked Jesse. Believe me, I've tried. It's not even my job. That's the job of the medical examiner's office. I'm not supposed to even be involved in that sort of thing. But I called down to Inkster to a colleague of mine, since I understand that's where Mr. Yerushalayim is from. He told me that he did, in fact, handle the funerals for both of Mr. Yerushalayim's parents, but that there was no other family on record as having taken part in any of it. I'm a friend of the medical examiner, and he's tried whatever he could to find relatives too. He even called the Greek embassy in Washington, D.C. to try to track down the parents. They were immigrants from there, apparently. He was told that there is no Yerushalayim anywhere in his records as ever even existing anywhere in Greece. He said Yerushalayim is actually a Hebrew word meaning Jerusalem, but that's as far as anyone has gotten. Jesse said, well, we really can't let Chris go without a proper burial. Please, don't do anything for another day. We'll be back to make some decisions by tomorrow. Well, I'll wait till then, but not any longer. I have obligations, and there are laws about bodies being embalmed and buried within a reasonable amount of time. Health issues, you know. They left the funeral home and went over to Daisy's Diner for a slice of her award-winning cherry pie, and they discussed what to do. Dale and Gail, the twins, had an idea. You guys are always talking about how Chris had you all go to the neighboring towns and distribute those flyers for his open house. Now, hundreds of people showed up. Thousands, interjected Ken. How about if we do that sort of thing? Only this time we pass out flyers asking for donations to bury Chris, Jesse suggested. Well, that's just wrong, said Michael, the accountant. That was for an occasion. I'm not even sure asking for money like that's legal. Besides, suppose we don't get enough to do anything. What are we going to do with the money we do get? And if we did get it and raise more than needed, what would we do with the extra money? I see IRS violations written all over that plan. Well, maybe we can just let people in town know. We can put out those little canisters on business countertops you always see, said Tony. Too time-consuming. It would be too little too late, said Michael. But we could give the mayor down in Seagull Harbor a call and see what he can do. That's where all those amazing healings took place, after all. There might be enough interest in honoring Chris down there to do the trick. So they called Mayor George. He thought it a wonderful idea and said he would personally work to raise the full amount and have it to them by Friday noon. Now, politicians have an amazing way of raising lots of money for whatever they really want to do. He got on the phone, he called Terry Jackson and Sandy Miller, and the two women who had believed that Chris had healed their kids. They and their loved ones promised a total of $4,500 and said they'd bring it to the mayor's office within the hour. The mayor himself came up with the remaining $2,000 out of his own pocket. He knew that he had received something more precious than money when he got his Susan back. He owed Chris more than a paltry $2,000 for what he had done for him. Didn't they all? The least he could do was to honor him at his death. When the mayor called back 2 hours later and told them that he had the needed funds, Chris's friends were astounded so quickly. How was that even possible? Apparently, people who appreciated what Chris did for them could really come through. They all decided that they would put in what money they could themselves, and they'd have a blowout funeral like Tillum had never seen. They called Mr. Black and told him of the mayor's success. And Mr. Black told Jesse that he was a personal friend of the mayor's, and that if he said that the money was good, it most certainly would be there. He would begin the preparations immediately, knowing the fees were on their way. He would be finished with the embalming by Friday afternoon. They could have Chris laying in state by Friday evening. Sam told him that would be perfect. At this point, they did, in fact, take Gail and Dale's suggestions. They printed up some flyers giving a brief bio of Chris, along with a photocopy of the newspaper article about Chris's murder and details about the funeral. Chris would lay in state on Friday evening at the funeral home from 5 until 9, and then again, assuming a lot of people would want to pay their respects, on Saturday. The funeral would be at the Methodist Church on Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Then they went from house to house all over Tellum and into the nearby towns and passed those flyers out, about 2,500 of them. And people came. At 5 o'clock on Friday, there were dozens of people at the funeral home. By 7, many of the early visitors had gone home, but were replaced by dozens more. There was a steady stream until the funeral home closed. Then on Saturday, even more mourners showed up. It was for Tellum almost like one of those political funerals where people filed by, waiting in long lines to touch the casket. No one knew how many actually came to pay their respects, but Mr. Black said he'd never seen anything quite like it. There were so many people on such short notice, but people didn't just file by. They stayed and talked with one another. They talked about Chris and how he had helped them, or about something that he had said or that impacted their lives, or how he had been so kind. A few talked about his religion and how special a relationship he had with God and his peculiar manner of praying. Some said he had literally changed their lives through his words and his wisdom. It seems a bit uncouth to say it, but Chris's wake was probably the biggest social event in Tellum since his open house. Now, some of the visitors commented on how natural he looked lying there in the casket. Others reminded them that there's nothing natural looking about a dead person. True, Black had done a remarkable job on Chris's wounds and bruises, but still, here was a man who seemed to be life itself, now without life. There really is nothing natural about that. Now, quite a number of the guests in those 2 days cautiously reached into the casket and touched Chris's hand or cheek or forehead. They were rewarded for their efforts by forever remembering that touch, how cold and hard and lifeless his body was. Nothing at all like the man they saw walking down the streets of Tellum, chatting with everyone at his shop, teaching how to make a dovetail joint at his workshops, laughing. All who touched him wished they hadn't. Mayor George and Sandy and Terry came up from Seagull Harbor to pay their respects. They would stay overnight at Millie's B&B for the funeral the following day. You could see the distress in their faces. Their loss was especially sharp because of their brief, ultra-powerful encounter with Chris. They would never forget him. They'd never want to. Well, Sunday morning arrived all too soon. Not much sleep was had by anyone. Yet the people who knew Chris best headed for Chris's store to meet their usual 7 a.m. coffee time. Usually they didn't meet on Sundays, but today was an exception. They knew that today would perhaps be the last time they would be together like this. So Nat got to the shop first, so reached into his pocket for the key. Tony, Michael, and Jesse were with him. Coming up the street, they could see Dale and Gail. Campbell must have gone fishing early. He'd be there shortly. Nat put his key into the door lock and started to enter, when suddenly he stopped and took a step back. In almost a comic fashion, Tony and Jesse and Michael, who had been following him, all collided into Nat, almost knocking him over. "What are you doing, Nat? Stop goofing around." And when they saw what had startled Nat, sitting there at the table, the big round oak table, smiling at them, was Chris. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" demanded Jesse. "Get out of here before I call the cops." "Jesse, it's me, Chris. Nat, Michael, Tony, come on in and sit down. I poured you some vintage wine, and here's some of that pita bread you always kid me about. It's fresh and it's delicious." Jesse, Nat, and Michael and Tony all came in cautiously and pulled out chairs and sat down. None of them could take their eyes off this guy, whomever he was. None of them said a word. He looked like Chris, and his voice sounded like Chris's, but there's no way. That was simply impossible. Every one of them had reached in and touched Chris in that casket. That body could not be revived. They could hear Dale and Gail coming up the walk. They actually waited their reaction. Gail and Dale came in chatting and looking at the guys who all looked as though they had seen a ghost, and they spotted Chris. "Whoa, dude, you're back. Awesome," said Dale. Gail said, "Fantastic. How'd you do that, Chris? You were dead as a doornail. This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Guys, what's wrong with you?" "This isn't Chris, you fools," Sam said. "This guy's pulling some kind of scam. He's a Chris lookalike." Well, the guy who looked like Chris said, "Jesse, the rest of you, come and eat with me, drink with me, let's talk." And the Chris lookalike began to talk to them about God and truth and faith and life and eternity. And as they talked, they knew somehow this was not an imposter. This really was, as astoundingly impossible as it was, Chris. And tears began flowing freely down their cheeks, making their pita salty tasting. They didn't care. All they knew was that the utterly impossible had happened in their lives, and that this could never go back to be, and they could never go back to not believing all that Chris ever said again. They would never doubt again. They could not waver from this day forward. They could only believe and trust and tell others of this most unexpected, unlikely outcome. Who would believe them? They scarcely believed it themselves, yet they knew it to be more true than anything else in their lives. "Where's Campbell?" said Chris. "Probably went out fishing early. He'll be here soon," said Jesse. And just as Jesse said that, Campbell walked in. He looked around at all the red eyes and tear-stained faces, and then saw Chris. "Campbell, he's back," said Tony. "Chris is alive. Can you believe it? Isn't it the most amazing thing you've ever seen?" Campbell looked directly at the Chris man for a moment before saying anything. "No, this man certainly looks like Chris, sort of, but not exactly. You all obviously believe he is Chris, but you and I both know that's not possible. You're fooling yourselves. He's fooling you. I won't believe it until I examine his wounds and see for myself." But he never did. Chris spoke, Campbell, and that single word, his own name out of Chris's mouth. Campbell fell on his knees and began to weep and said, my God, Chris." And Chris took him by the arm and lifted him up and gave him a bear hug like this burly fisherman had never even had even as he continued to sob. They all gathered around, holding one another, blubbering like babies. Mark Black was quite certain he had closed and latched the casket last night, but now it was clearly not latched. He distinctly remembered lowering the body with the crank, carefully arranging the funeral bedding and closing the lid. He remembered turning the lid crank to seal the casket. This wasn't one of those, I know I did it, it's an automatic thing. He clearly remembered looking down at Chris's body and wondering what this man was, as so many people had come to pay their respects, that in 10 hours, friends could raise enough money for the entire funeral bill. He looked down at him, lowered him, closed the lid, and cranked the latch quite deliberately. But there it was. The lid was unlatched. Maybe I'm losing it. Wait a minute, he thought, as he rushed over to the dead man's box and opened it all the way. Oh no, it can't be. The body's gone. Where'd the body go? What's going on? This can't be happening. Someone has stolen the body of this poor soul. and he rushed to the funeral home office and called the police. Yes, officer, that's what I said. Someone came in during the night and stole the body awaiting burial this afternoon. You've got to get over here right away and find whoever did this and get the body back before 2 o'clock. You can't imagine what this can do for my business. No, I don't know who would take a body or why. All I know is that it's gone and you have to find it. Please, come now. Pastor Johansson felt honored to be able to host the big event in his church. Chris's friends made it clear that they would put the funeral service together and that Mayor McGeorge and Terry Jackson from Seagull Harbor would be the main speakers, and that he and the other clergy in town would be limited to a 3-minute time slot. Now, as you may recall, Chris was a regular attender at each of their churches, attending each Sunday on a rather strange kind of Sunday morning worship marathon schedule. He wasn't quite sure what to say in his 3 minutes. What can a minister say of any significance in 3 minutes? Even though he was a minor player in the service, he was honored to have it happen here at St. Eremos Church. Judging from the number of people he had visited the funeral home yesterday, there should be quite a turnout. The sexton had put out all of the extra chairs they had. He hoped they would be enough. At 1:30, Johansson was getting a bit anxious. Guests were already starting to arrive, and the body wasn't even there yet. And where were those men who insisted that they would be in charge? The Seagull Harbor mayor had already arrived. The Congregational minister was there. The Baptist minister was there. The priest had just pulled up into the parking lot. At 1:45, the church was almost already full. Still, nobody in charge. Nobody, nothing. Johansson had the acolytes light the candles. The organist began to play as people chatted or sat in silent meditation. A couple of his church members had taken it upon themselves to direct traffic out the parking lot. Cars were lining the streets waiting to get in. At 1:55, Johansson was in a near panic. He was a young minister. He had done exactly 3 funerals in his entire career. He was sorely aware that those weren't very good. What was he going to do? The church was packed. People were standing because there were no more seats. There must have been already about 400 people there. Every square inch of the sanctuary was filled with human flesh. The fire marshal would have a fit if he were to see this. He should probably talk to one of the other ministers. Maybe they'd know what to do in a situation like this. They all had more experience than he did at this kind of thing. But how would that look? This was his church. But what would even they do? Black hadn't even delivered the body yet. Yet you can't start a service and then midway through have the body wheeled in. That's just not too cool. At 2 o'clock, Johansson rose from his chair on the chancel and came to the microphone. The organist played the final few bars of what she was playing, and all went quiet. He tapped on the microphone to make sure it was on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to say that the funeral service for Christoph Yerushalayim will have to be delayed. The funeral home hasn't brought the remains, and the organizers of the memorial service seem to be waylaid. I'm sure we'll get underway shortly. Please be patient. Please enjoy Mrs. Carroll on the organ as she plays some wonderful hymns of the faith. We'll get underway shortly, I'm sure. But before he sat down, before Mrs. Carroll had played the first note on the organ, the sanctuary doors burst open, and in marched Jesse Johnson, and right behind him came Tony Snavely, then Nat Tracy and Campbell Story, and Michael St. James, and Dale and Gail Dudley. They all gathered on the chancel area. Chancel each had on their face the biggest smile I'd ever seen in anyone, and everyone wondered what was going on. This was unlike any funeral any of them had ever been to. Johansson and the other ministers stood almost spontaneously, clearly concerned at the inappropriateness of what they had just seen. These 7 men, not being appropriately solemn, but outwardly joyful. Just then, the doors burst open again, and in marched Chris. And pandemonium broke out. Women fainted. Old men's mouths dropped open. Children cheered. Everyone was talking and shouting and calling to Chris, and he just smiled and waved and laughed, and was eating it up. He made his way to the front of the sanctuary. When he got to the chancel, he hugged the 7, and then he gave hearty handshakes to the ministers, pulling each one in for a big hug as well. People were cheering and weeping, and astonishment was everywhere. It was really like nothing any of them or any of us have ever seen or experienced. The emotion, the power, the wonder, the undiluted joy was simply overwhelming. You died?
I'm going.
Oh, you're still going?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Chris held up his hands to quiet everyone, but he must have held up his hands half a dozen times over the course of several minutes before any semblance of order came about. When the people quieted, he spoke to them. My friends, you have now experienced the power of the Almighty God. You will never forget it for as long as you live. You gathered here now believe in the impossible. You gathered here believe in God and God's love and magnificence. Truth is revealed in you in a way in which you cannot deny. You've been blessed today, but even more blessed will be your children and your cousins and your elderly parents and your grandkids who have not seen what you have seen, but yet believe because they've been told. And that is what you must do. You must tell them. You must tell your families and their neighbors and your friends. You must go beyond tell them and tell anyone who will listen. Will they think you odd for believing in life after death? They may, but that changes nothing. You know there will be no funeral today. Mrs. Carroll, would you play my favorite hymn? It's on page 216 of the church hymnal. A rousing rendition, if you please. Everyone sing. And that day, the hymn, Christ Arose, was sung like it had never been sung in Mount Eremos before or since. Chris hung around town for another month and a half. He chatted with everyone he met. He seemed to always have this wonderful smile on his face that everyone made everyone happy. During that time, Tellum may have been the happiest place in the nation, perhaps the most joyous place on earth. It was a town full of true believers. Now, the news crews never came. People had called them, of course, but they weren't interested, they said, in flying saucer kinds of stories. Only facts, thank you. Then one day, Chris was simply gone. No one knew where. Maybe back to Inkster, maybe to other towns. But that last day, everyone saw him. The sun shone a bit brighter, the sky was a bit bluer, the spirits were a bit higher. Let us pray. Gracious God, we are people who believe in life after death. We are a people who believe in eternity in heaven. We understand. Help us to understand more fully as this season progresses and as Easter approaches, when Jesus our Lord rose from the grave. If you have an opportunity to sing and you know the words, please sing along with Christ Arose. gracious God, thank you for this opportunity to be here today, for worshiping together even though apart. Thank you for the technology that allows that to happen. Thank you for being among us, even as we are in our individual homes. Give us your blessing this week. Keep us safe, keep us healthy, in the name of Christ Jesus. Now may the grace of God be with you this day and always, as you go forth into the world, safely, cautiously, with prudence. And may you be blessed by God. Amen.